Go.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another segment of Exploring Faith, sponsored by the Spartanburg County Library. My name is Elizabeth Woods, and I am a member of the Baha'i Faith. There are no clergy in the Baha'i Faith or a similar leadership role, so please note that I am presenting my personal understanding and views about the Baha'i Faith and sharing some of my experiences as a member of the Baha'i Faith. I'm not representing any particular institution, Baha'i institution, or official Baha'i viewpoint. I'm just a regular person, one of your Spartanburg neighbors, and sharing my perspective. So I invite you to let your vision be world embracing and join me as we explore the Baha'i Faith together. I'd like to begin by offering a prayer for unity from the Baha'i Faith. Oh my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy laws. Help them, O God, in their endeavors and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, lead them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord. Most Baha'i activities begin with a prayer and end with a prayer. And I have found that beginning with a prayer, particularly when you're attempting to make your first Zoom video, has been very important. So that unity prayer, I think, expresses so much about how I feel in terms of uniting all of humanity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, or I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But first, I want to begin by taking us back in history to the 1800s and talk a little bit about the religious movements that were taking place at that time. The followers of several different religions had come to the conclusion, based on their sacred writings, that certain prophecies would soon be fulfilled. In Europe, several Christian groups found what they considered clear biblical evidence supporting the impending return of His Holiness Jesus Christ. A colony of German Templars, in fact, moved to the foot of Mount Carmel in Palestine, now Israel, to await His advent. I actually had an opportunity to see the homes that those German Templars built when I visited the Holy Land several years ago. In the USA, the Millerites came to a similar conclusion and focused on the years 1843 and 1844 as the anticipated years of the return of Christ. In the Middle East, the focus was on Islamic traditions, which indicated the impending arrival of the Qayyim, or the return of the 12th Imam of Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the day of resurrection. Baha'is believe all these prophetic expectations were fulfilled by the appearance of two messengers of God, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. First, I want to talk a little bit about the Bab, who was born Sayyid Ali Muhammad. He lived from 1819 to 1844. In 1844, he was a 26-year-old son of a reputable and cultured family of merchants living in Shiraz, Persia, now known as Iran. He was a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and renowned for his all-pervasive, heart-captivating charm. He was also known for having a profoundly keen mind. On the evening of May 23rd, 1844, where'd you hear that year before? Yeah, the Millerites were focusing on 1843 and 1844 as the return of Christ. So on the evening of May 23rd, 1844, Sayyid Ali Muhammad founded a new religion by claiming that he was a new messenger of God. and the promised Qaim of Islam. He took the title, the Bab, meaning the gate, and calmly but boldly announced, and I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. I am the one whose name you have for 1,000 years invoked, at whose mention you have risen, whose advent you have longed to witness, and the hour of whose revelation you have prayed God to hasten. Now, there are many stories and vignettes about the historical record, and in the historical record about the personhood of the Bab, and also what occurred with his followers during his 6-year ministry. I don't have time in this presentation to go into that, but these are very well-known facts. The record includes how the Baha'i religion spread in Persia and how 20,000 followers gave their lives in an effort to create a new religious reality. The Bab endured imprisonment, torture, and ultimately martyrdom in a Tabriz square on July 9th, 1850. In 2019, a movie entitled The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith was released by the Universal House of Justice, the international governing board of the Baha'is of the world, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Bab. The movie is now available on YouTube. And if you would like to learn more about the Bab's life and that historical period in the Baha'i Faith, I encourage you to watch the film. Again, it's The Bab, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith, and it is a movie on YouTube. So in summary, the Bab is the herald forerunner of the Baha'i Faith. He announced that he was the bearer of a divinely ordained message destined to transform the spiritual life of humanity. His mission was to prepare the way for the coming of a second messenger from God, he said, greater than himself, who would usher in an age of peace and justice. I want to share with you, this is a book that I have that was put out by the tourist board in Haifa, Israel. This is the shrine of the Bab, where the Bab is buried. Now, if you want to know more about how he came to be buried when he was martyred in Tabriz, Persia, and is now resting, his resting site is in Haifa, Israel, you need to watch the movie, The Gate. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the next step in the development of the Baha'i Faith. I'm going to introduce you to Mirza Hussain Ali. He was born in 1817 and lived until 1892. Born in the province of Nur, near Tehran, to an ancient noble family that originally traced its roots back to the dynasty of former Persian kings. He was a descendant of Abraham and David on his mother's side. As a youth, he displayed an altruistic mind and sympathy for the poor. This was a very rare trait for someone of his class and status back in those days. And he also was renowned for his keen intellect, despite the fact that he had very little formal education. At the age of 27, Mirza Hussain Ali was living a relatively quiet life in the countryside. He was, concerned with his philanthropic endeavors and his family responsibilities when he heard the new and divinely inspired message of the Bab, and he immediately became a Babi, which was how the Bab's followers were known at that time. He became a staunch supporter and defender of the Baha'i faith, and this eventually attracted fierce opposition from the Islamic clerics and Persian political leaders, particularly as the Baha'i faith grew. Mirza Hussain Ali ended up being imprisoned and also tortured, and he was eventually banished from his native land. It's interesting, he was such a stout, staunch, and courageous defender of the Bab, although the two of them never met in person. Again, I lack the time to be able to tell you more about his life and the history of that period, but suffice it to say that there were many highs and lows along that epic journey of 40 years between the time that he left Persia and the time that he came to settle or be settled in the Holy Land. One of the highs occurred in the spring of 1863. As further punishment from the leaders of the Ottoman Empire for being a Baha'i, helping to spread this religion, Mirza Hussain Ali was being expelled from the city of Baghdad in Iraq. He was to go to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, Turkey. He was staying in a beautiful garden, which has now been known as the Garden of Rizwan, where he was receiving guests and saying goodbye to the various dignitaries and fellow Babis who were tearfully bidding him farewell. In that beautiful garden, in that lovely setting, he announced to those gathered around that the prophecies of the Bab had been fulfilled, and that he was the promised manifestation of God for which the Babis had been waiting. He became known by the title Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God, and his followers became known as Baha'is. To give you some inkling of how Baha'u'llah received the intimation of the Spirit that he had been chosen to reveal this new message from God, I would like to share with you the following quote from Baha'u'llah. He said, "I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes of the all-glorious were wafted over me and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. And he bade me lift up my voice between earth and heaven. And for this there befell me what hath caused the tears of every man of understanding to flow." Baha'u'llah, The Light of the World, is a movie that was released in 2017 to commemorate the bicentennial of the birth of Baha'u'llah. This again was commissioned by the Universal House of Justice, and it's available on YouTube. There's a shorter version and a longer version. So again, I invite you to watch the movie to learn more about the life of Baha'u'llah, the epic journey that he took for 40 years from his native land to Israel, and also how his spiritual teachings are affecting change, transformation of individuals and communities and villages throughout the world. So again, the title, Baha'u'llah, The Light of the World, available on YouTube. So in summary, Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, is the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith, the promised one foretold by the Bab, and all past divinely inspired messengers such as Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, Muhammad, Jesus Christ. His new revelation from God to humanity or outlined a framework for the spiritual transformation of the planet, and ultimately will help to meet both the spiritual and material needs of human life. So this is a profound and also you could say has it ever been that we've had a revelation where it said it was going to unite the whole world through the spiritual teachings? I'm not aware of any, but let's move on. So there are a couple more central figures of the Baha'i Faith that I'd like to tell you about. One is Abbasa Fendi. He lived from 1844 to 1921. He was the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, and he was actually born on the same day, same evening, that the Bab declared his mission, May 23rd, 1844. He is considered the perfect exemplar of the Baha'u'llah's teachings, and he became head of the Baha'i Faith after Baha'u'llah's death in 1892. He began to use the title Abdul Baha, or Servant of the Glory, at that time. And that's how Baha'is know him, as Abdul Baha, Servant of the Glory. He is not a messenger of God or a manifestation of God, but he does hold a unique position in the Baha'i Faith as the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant and the authoritative interpreter of Baha'u'llah's writings. He had the opportunity to travel to North Africa, Europe, and North America in 1911 to proclaim to Westerners this new message, and also to help lend support to the small group of Western Baha'is at that time. In addition to Abdul Baha, there's also Shoghi Effendi Rabbani. Shoghi Effendi Rabbani lived from 1897 to 1957. He became guardian, that's his title, the guardian of the Baha'i Faith in 1921, when his grandfather, Abdul Baha, passed. During his 36-year ministry, he guided the growth and development of the Baha'i Faith to a fourfold increase in its membership. His efforts also increased in the number of countries, territories where the faith was established, from 35 when he became the guardian of the faith in 1921 to more than 250 when he died in 1957. I've had the opportunity to visit his gravesite outside of London in England, Great Britain. So maybe some interesting Baha'i statistics for you. There are more than 5 million Baha'is in the world. The Baha'i Faith is established in virtually every country, independent territory in the world. There are about 2,100 indigenous tribes, cultures, and ethnic groups represented in the Baha'i Faith. There are currently 188 councils at the national level, overseeing the work of their communities, a network of over 300 training institutes, offering formal programs of Baha'i education around the globe. There are several thousand social economic programs sponsored by the Baha'is, 600 schools, and over 70 development agencies. There are currently 10 Baha'i houses of worship around the world in various locations. I've had the good pleasure of being able to visit the house of worship on the North American continent in Wilmette, Illinois, also in Panama, and went to Germany, had an opportunity to visit the house of worship there, and in Uganda. I'd love to be able to visit all the houses of worship, but oh well, we don't know when we may be able to do that again. But they're all very beautiful. They have the same architectural structure in the sense that they're 9-sided, which means that people can come in from every direction. The houses of worship, the Baha'is, we're the custodians, but they're actually for the world. And the ones that I have visited, people come from all over the world, from so many different faith backgrounds, to pray, to worship, to meditate, and to reflect. It's a very wonderful experience to be able to be in them. And you can if you Google Baha'i houses of worship, you can see the different architectural styles and learn more about those houses of worship. Some other statistics include that the Baha'i international community has been registered with the United Nations since 1948, and that they have international community offices in Addis Ababa, Geneva, Jakarta, New York, and Brussels. The Baha'i writings and other literature have been translated into over 800 languages. This is just one of the books that I have that contains the writings of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah wrote over, his writings fill up over 100 volumes. And many of his writings have not been translated yet into English. So we have some things to look forward to. His most holy book is called the Kitab-i-Aqdas. And this is the Book of Laws. So I just wanted to share those two with you. Let's see, I mentioned the terraces, the shrine of the Bab that I showed you the book. Each year, approximately 1 million people visit the Baha'i shrines and terraces and gardens in Mount Carmel in Haifa. In Iran, where the Baha'i Faith originated, there are approximately 300,000 Baha'is, constituting the largest religious minority in that country. And guess what? In South Carolina, the Baha'i Faith is increasingly acknowledged as the second largest religion in the state. And it's also acknowledged as an important contributor to the development of the social fabric of the state, particularly during the tumultuous civil rights era, because there was in many situations, the Baha'is who came from various different backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities, they were working together. Many times they couldn't even find places where they could meet. So in an effort to have places for Baha'is to meet, some of the locations had to, different buildings, they had to change their policies about having segregated meetings. And so Baha'is were very instrumental in helping to integrate locations here in South Carolina. This is a book on the history of the Baha'i Faith in South Carolina, written by Dr. Louis Venters from the upstate. So if you're interested, at the end of my presentation, I'll provide you with some websites. And this is a little book that you may want to get to learn more about the history of the Baha'i Faith in South Carolina. While we're talking about information and history, this is a copy of the American Baha'i. It comes out every other month. And this publication is one that all Baha'i households receive. The information in it is written in English, Persian, and Spanish. And it keeps the Baha'i communities updated on what's going on, not only across the United States, but also in other parts of the world. So we've talked about some Baha'i statistics. We've talked about a little bit about the history. Let's see, I think it's important that you, I probably need to let you know a little bit about the current administrative order. So after the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, passed in 1957, there was a period where the faith was growing and developing in order to elect the permanent governing body, international governing body of the Baha'is, and that's called the Universal House of Justice. You probably heard me say those words before. The Universal House of Justice is the current, and it currently guides the progress of the Baha'i Faith, I guess you could say. The guidance provided by the Universal House of Justice helps to ensure the unity of thought and action in the Baha'i world community. As you know, we're learning to translate into reality Baha'u'llah's teachings and vision for a spiritually and materially prosperous global civilization. So you think about all those diverse people coming together in this religion, well, something has to help keep us, focused and unified. And that's one of the roles of the Universal House of Justice. It also applies the Baha'i teachings to the requirements of an ever-evolving society and is thus empowered to legislate on matters not explicitly covered in the faith's sacred text. It strives to exert a positive influence on the welfare of humankind and promotes universal education, peace, and prosperity. So, my attraction to the Baha'i Faith, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And again, remember, I'm giving you my perspective and my experience. If you talk to some other Baha'is, they will probably have some other things to tell you. But I was raised in a Baha'i household. My mother became a Baha'i in the early 1960s. And although she raised my brothers and me with the Baha'i teachings, she insisted that we learn about other faith traditions. And this is in alignment with Baha'u'llah's first teaching, which is that individuals should independently seek and experience reality for him or herself. We should not just, become some part of a religion because our parents are part of that religion, or most of the people around us are part of that religion. But rather, we should seek the reality of the religion and the truth of that religion, if you will, for ourselves. So I attended church on a regular basis with my grandmother and other family members, and visited other places of worship. I learned about Judaism and Catholicism. I was really disappointed when I learned that I could not become a nun as a Baha'i if I became a Baha'i. I enrolled in a comparative religion class in college. I was attracted to the Black Muslim movement for a while because, during these experiences, I could see the common threads weaving those religions together. In my home, I have copies of the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and other sacred texts, for I find guidance, spiritual guidance, and sustenance in those sacred texts. Eventually, in my independent investigation of religious truth, I came to believe that Baha'u'llah is the divinely inspired educator, whose lessons are the ones meant for this stage of human evolution. I was particularly attracted to the lesson that religious truth is not absolute but relative, and divine revelation is continuous and progressive. It's a continuous and progressive process. Baha'is often use the analogy of going to school to think about this progressive revelation. It's like when we go to kindergarten, we learn some basic information, your ABCs, your 1, 2, 3s, the colors, shapes, those types of things. It wouldn't be appropriate for the teacher to start talking to us about algebra. We wouldn't be able to understand it. But the teacher understands algebra, but the teacher knows that we do not have the understanding and the capability to understand algebra at that time. So they patiently, hopefully lovingly, teach us those basic things, ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. As we grow and our abilities grow, it's sort of like, each time we go to a different grade, you go from kindergarten to the first grade, go to the second grade, you're building. Those are the building blocks for moving higher and higher in our understanding and in our education process. At a certain point, we begin to understand algebra, and our skills expand, our understanding expands. We begin to understand what the teacher knows. And in some cases, depending on the situation, you might get to know more than what the teacher does, right? So they have to move you on to another instructor, higher level. So religion is similar to that. Each one of those manifestations that have come, they have brought a certain teaching, uh, laid a foundation for the religion of God. We're all learning in the same school. We just didn't know it. But Baha'u'llah has brought the understanding that we're all in the same school, the school of God's religion, and that each one of those prior religions built on the previous religion and prepared with the information for the coming of the next religion. And in this case, Baha'is believe that that new religion, or the one for today, is the Baha'i Faith. Well, that concept of progressive revelation made sense to me. Some people also use the analogy of a book. You know, when you're reading a book, you're reading the chapters, you're gaining more information to reach a conclusion. So whether you're thinking about it from a school analogy or a book analogy, we're either going to the same school, folks, or we're reading from the same book. And that just made a lot of sense to me. So let's see, the purpose of life, Baha'u'llah's teachings affirm that the purpose of life is to know God, is to serve humanity, that we have a soul and that's our true identity, and that by walking a path of service to God, we grow in our spiritual development, we gain spiritual attributes that help us to be able to function in our next form of existence when this body dies and the soul moves forward as we, continue that journey towards our Creator. This is a quote from Shoghi Effendi that I wanted to share that I think says to me, what the purpose of life is. The Baha'i teaching of human fellowship and kindness implies that we must always be ready to extend every assistance and help when we can to those who are in distress and suffering. Baha'i charity is of the very essence of the teachings and should therefore be developed in every Baha'i community. So walking this path of service to God and to humanity, that was one of the motivating forces behind my decision to become a social worker, to be of service to others through social work. Let's see, let me share with you some of the daily practices of being a Baha'i. Through prayer and devotional life, we have daily prayers that we read, that we recite. We study the sacred writings on a daily basis in the morning and in the evening. We're encouraged to take time to meditate, to reflect on what we're reading, that through the practice of meditation, the secret things become unveiled. We also study and memorize the Baha'i writings so that we can share that information freely with others. And then we, most importantly, we strive to put Baha'u'llah's teachings into action. As I mentioned to you before, we have a vast literature of writings from Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, the Bab, and also Shoghi Effendi. And the Universal House of Justice sends regular messages to the Baha'i world, particularly each year at the Festival of Rizwan, which is commemorates the time that Baha'u'llah, remember he was in the Garden of Rizwan, that he declared his mission. So we get a lovely message from the Universal House of Justice each year at that time. And so we not only study the writings for ourselves, but we also invite others to join us in studying the writings. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how, if you're interested, you can join the Baha'is in Spartanburg in doing so, studying the writings. We do have a different rhythm of worship, if you will. Baha'is have a different calendar, a calendar of 19 months. of 19 days. And during the 19-day month, we also have what's called the 19-day feast. This is our opportunity to come together for spiritual devotions and readings, to consult on the affairs of the community, as well as individuals can share information about what's happening, and good news and announcements, prayers for the sick and the shut in. We also have an opportunity for social fellowship and refreshments. We have a month of fasting that occurs in March. For 19 days, we fast from sunrise to sunset. So we refrain from eating or drinking. However, there are exemptions to fasting. Those individuals, mothers who are nursing, or women who are pregnant, the elderly, and or ill. So people who are ill. But it's a wonderful time to be focused on something other than eating and drinking, and also it's an opportunity to really think about what's important in life. And I think that there's some health benefits to fasting as well. I know once you kind of get through those initial days, it feels really good to be on a fast. We have holy day observances, and I talked about the Festival of Rizwan. We have a festival at the end of the fast called Nowruz, or New Year. That's an opportunity to get together and have fellowship and share in the joys of the season. We also celebrate the ascension, or commemorate the ascension of the Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. And we also commemorate the martyrdom of the Bab, the declaration of the Bab, the declaration of Baha'u'llah. And we have a 4-day period at the end of February that's called the Yamiha. And that's a period that prepares for the fast, but it's also opportunity to visit with one another. Now we have to do it virtually, and to exchange gifts and be of service, to do service projects. We just celebrated the birth of the Bab last week, and had a food drive for the individuals in the community who could benefit from that. Let's see. I wanted to talk to you about devotional gatherings. That's an opportunity for anyone, not just Baha'is, to come together to pray, to read the writings, not just from the Baha'i Faith, but also from other sacred texts. We have my family, we have in our family people from different religions. We're not all Baha'is. And so we have a devotional that my brother and sister-in-law sponsor once a month. We're doing it virtually now, but we come together and we read from the Bible and from, the different sacred texts, and we sing songs, and it's a lovely way to kind of connect with each other. But devotional gatherings, if you're interested in having a virtual, participating in a virtual devotional gathering, I will give you some information on how to contact the Baha'is of Spartanburg. We also have study circles, and this again is something that anyone can participate in. I wanted to just share with you a couple of the, these are classes that take place to do a little bit more in-depth study. This one is called Reflections on the Life of the Spirit. I have another one here, The Twin Manifestations, that talks about the life and times of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. There's a Walking Together, A Path of Service. I think there's a total of like 11 or 12 books. Even one on how to teach children's classes or junior youth spiritual empowerment classes. So if you would be interested in coming together to form a study circle or to join a study circle, again, you can get in touch with the Baha'is. The phone number for getting in touch with the Baha'is is 864-346-2650. Again, that's 864 346-2650. That's the phone number for the Baha'is in Spartanburg. The children's classes and junior youth classes we're not holding at this particular time, but if you're interested in starting a class, or you can get in touch with us and we can see about starting a junior youth or children's class for you. The junior youth and the children's classes are wonderful opportunities for children and youth to get together to learn about developing virtues: honesty, trustworthiness, helpfulness, those types of things. And it's also an opportunity where they combine the arts and crafts with tying that into those spiritual lessons. And so I find that the children really enjoy themselves, and these are taking place all over the, well, yeah, in Spartanburg, but all over the world. So you could probably even join a virtual children's class in another community. So if you're interested, please let us know. I would say another teaching that was really important to me was this concept of the oneness of the human race. I was 7 years old when I integrated an elementary school in my hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. And so growing up in a Baha'i home where I had learned about, the oneness of the human race, to go to school and all of a sudden kids won't play with you and you're calling your names because of the color of your skin, that made absolutely no sense to me. So this concept of the oneness of the human race, I think that's so important, and particularly we can see the need for teaching about how we're all organically connected as one species. The Universal House of Justice wrote in a message back in between 1963 and 86 that disunity is a danger that the nations and peoples of the earth can no longer endure. The consequences are too terrible to contemplate, too obvious to require any demonstration. And that principle or concept, the teaching of the oneness of the human race, that was something that just galvanized me even as a kid. I knew that racism, prejudice of any kind, was a learned behavior, and that just like you learn it, you can unlearn it. And so even as a kid, I became an advocate for social justice and equity. Another teaching that I was attracted to was this concept of the equality of women and men, particularly when, I grew up in a time when we had what's called the women's movement. and so women were talking about empowerment and those types of things. Again, we did some work, but we still have some work to do. The Baha'u'llah describes men and women as being like the wings of a bird, and that if one wing is damaged, or if one wing is not strong, then the bird can't take flight. A bird needs both of its wings to be equally strong and to be useful. And I think that's the way it is in humanity. We need the wings of both males and females to be equally strong in order for humanity to really reach the heights that it can in its evolution. So this concept of the equality of women and men, it means that in the Baha'i Faith, if you're only able to educate one of your children, if you have males and females, you're encouraged to educate the female child, because the females in many instances will be the mothers of that next generation. And they need to be able to be educated in order to help bring that family, those children, into a healthy, happy environment. So you will find in many countries where education for girls has not been the norm, you will find that in Baha'i families, the girls are being educated. And in fact, there are schools, many schools that are dedicated to educating female children. I love that concept. I hope you do too. I had an opportunity to see just, how this equality of women and men can be different in different places when I traveled to Uganda. I had been invited to talk about the equality of women and men by the Women's Committee of the Baha'is of Uganda. And we were traveling in places where it had only been like recently, like within the last year or two, that women were permitted to speak in public. So for me, having come from the United States and had the privileges that I have here, at least to be able to speak in public, it was quite an amazing experience to know that I was with women who just until a short while before had not been able to meet freely. And boy, were those ladies doing some things there. It was quite remarkable. So let's see. I need to check with my friend that's helping me to see what my time is like. How much time do we have left? We're doing okay? All right. So before I went into a new topic, I thought I better check with you. Some laws and ordinances in the Baha'i Faith. Baha'is are encouraged to perform a pilgrimage to the Holy Land to visit the shrines of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. And don't forget, if you want to know how they came to be there, you need to watch those movies that I told you about. The Bab, the Gate of God, and the Bab is how the Baha'i Faith formed, and then also the light of the world, Baha'u'llah, the light of the world. We're obliged to work a profession. We're to be loyal to our governments, to avoid intoxicants, smoking, and gambling, to be truthful and trustworthy, show kindness to animals, to maintain cleanliness, practice moderation with food and nutrition. Carrying arms is prohibited, but there is an exemption for military service, and to write a will and last testament. And then there are particular funeral guidelines, burial guidelines that we're also to follow. And that information you can find on the websites that I'm going to tell you about, as well as it's in the Kitabi Agdas, the Book of Laws. I wish that we had a live chat so that I could find out what questions you may have about the Baha'i Faith. But if you are interested in getting some questions answered, when you call the number for the Baha'i Faith in Spartanburg, the 864-346-2650, if you have questions specifically for me or feedback for me from this presentation, just let them know and we'll try to set up a virtual meeting. So basically, what do Baha'is believe in? They believe in one God, the oneness of humanity and the oneness of religion, the independent investigation of religious truth, the essential harmony of science and religion, the equality of women and men, the elimination of all forms of prejudice, that there should be a universal compulsory education for all, that there should be a universal auxiliary language, so that you would have your first language or your preferred language, but you would also learn this auxiliary language so that wherever you traveled, wherever you went in the world, you would be able to communicate. Sometimes those language differences can cause us to think that we're more different than we are. And I love that idea of being, especially when you travel to other places, you know what it's like when you are not able to communicate well. The disadvantage and the vulnerability that you feel. A spiritual solution to the economic problems of the world. and that universal peace should be upheld by a world tribunal of governments. These are very revolutionary concepts for some folk. I understand that. But rather than dismissing them or, you know, not learning more about them, I just encourage you to be open, to have that open mind, and to let your vision be world embracing, and come join us and learn more about these specifics of these teachings, because I didn't have time to go into a lot of the specifics. I understand that, but there's a way for us to do that through our virtual meetings or phone calls. So continue the exploration, and the website for finding out what's happening in the Baha'i world is www.baha'i.org. That's www.baha'i.org. If you're interested in getting some news about the Baha'i Faith, they have regular feeds coming out. You can Google or go to www.news.baha'i.org. That's www.news.baha'i.org. And want to get in touch with the Baha'is on their website here in Spartanburg, find out a little bit more about those devotional meetings, the children's classes, the junior youth empowerment classes, and the study circles, as well as some of the opportunities to fellowship with Baha'is. You can go to www.baha'i-spartanburg.org. www.baha'i-spartanburg.org. So I hope that you've enjoyed this journey that we've been on as we've explored the Baha'i Faith, and I hope that you will join me in continuing the exploration. And I'm looking forward to the next segment on exploring faiths with the Spartanburg Public Library. Take care. Bye-bye.